What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here, back with another episode, and we're kicking off our FCS conference and team previews today with the Big Sky, man, one of the top conferences in the FCS. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have on with me than my guy Chris Hammond over here from FCS Fan Nation. Fan Nation, man, check out their YouTube channel. Just hit 1,000 subs. We want to get them to 2K as fast as possible, man. So make sure to go subscribe to their YouTube channel, man. But Chris, how are you, man? And let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I wore my Bluebloods Big Sky Blue today for the preview. Yeah, you can find me at Chris_P on Twitter. Also, you can follow the FCS Fans Nation group. We got like 14,000 members. Just go on Facebook, FCS Fans Nation. And as that covered, we've got a YouTube channel that has a bunch of different podcasts from all around the country, from national team to conference perspectives. So give us a check, and we'd love it if you hit the subscribe button.
Hey, I big fan myself, man. I know the Facebook group is very, very popular, man. Always something going on in there, but we got to get to the season. And, I hopped on Sam Herder's podcast. And I've heard across a lot of podcasts that a lot of people think it's a two-team race for the national championship this year. It's really North Dakota State and South Dakota State, and everyone else is kind of an afterthought. But for you looking at the Big Sky, I know we'll probably talk about Montana State. What is your list of Big Sky teams that are realistic contenders for the national championship this year?
Montana State. We have a lot of good top 25 teams, and I think I think 6 are in it right now. The preseason for the stats, I think we probably get 7 that flirt with it during the year. I could see whoever our because we'll probably have a surprise team like the Big Sky always does that will somewhere fall in that ranks, and then like last year, you'll have a team like a Weber State that falls out of it for a bit and maybe climbs back in. So I think about 7 teams in the Big Sky could possibly be ranked. But if you're talking who are realistic semifinal or specifically final contenders, depending on how the bracket shapes itself out on seeding, you're getting Montana State, basically whichever one of them probably doesn't get thrown on the side of the bracket with NDSU.
Yeah, I second that. I think Montana for me is a little bit stronger candidate. I know it's been very interesting to look at the polls because I think some people are very high on Montana State or Montana, and not really both of them. They really have a preference there. And for me, I look at Montana as a little bit stronger just because, man, they are returning some studs on that defensive side, man. Justin Ford, in my opinion, has a really good argument to be the best defensive back in the country right now at the FCS level. And then you also get Patrick O'Connell coming back, not Walter Payton, a Buck Buchanan Award finalist. You get, Robbie Hawk coming back as well. That defensive line has some pretty good guys coming back. And I think this is the next topic I wanted to talk about. Isaiah Afonso is a big piece to Montana State's puzzle. It came out in spring practice that he could miss some time early in the season. I know they opened the season with McNeese State. I think they're still probably going to win that game even without him. But how much do you think his injury impacts the projections for Montana State?
It's hard to replace a guy like Isaiah Afonso. He is the preseason, offensive player of the year, and a guy that's absolutely a stud for the Big Sky Conference. That said, he's dealt with injuries his entire career at Montana State, and I'm not saying it's an easy person to replace because it by no means is. But I think if you kind of look at what Montana State has focused on in the offseason, because you're right, he did have offseason surgery. He's considered like month to month, not even day to day. Like they don't know if he'll be available in the first month, second month. I'm assuming at some point during the season, but we don't even really have confirmation on that. But you look at it, they bring in a transfer from San Diego State, Kagan Williams, who's that's probably who they're going to lean on a lot. In their spring game, they actually had 3 different guys score touchdowns, so they've been working out how to add a little bit of depth in that running back room. A major one would be Elijah Elliott. He played in 14 games last year. Also was the 4th leading rusher on the team. So that's a younger guy. He's going to be a true sophomore that, pending he gets hurt, you still have that 4-game red shirt, depending on when it happens. A guy that'll probably be around this program for a while that I think they really, really like headed into the fall. So I think you look at it and they have made it a point of interest to add running back depth. Because what we've been saying about this team forever was they were a quarterback away from being a championship team. It appears they get that. It took them all season to figure out it's Tommy Mellott, and they finally get him. You only see what he does in 4 games, but in that 4 games, they go from a good playoff team to a national title contender. He goes down in the championship game I don't think it mattered as much because really Montana State's defense is what was killing them in that game. They could not get NDSU off the field. So Tommy Mellott or not didn't help. But I think you look at this team, I think with Tommy Mellott coming back and some of the depth they've added in the running back room, I think the Isaiah Fonse injury is just, if he's not able to play in the playoffs, they probably won't make the title this year. But I still think they're a top-fledged Big Sky team. And I think they won't miss him as much as I think maybe the narrative is. I think it just takes him from a title contender to just, one of the probably top 6 programs in the nation.
Yeah, I like that, and I wonder, for me, Tommy Mellott also coming off an injury, but he looks like he's all but healed up and going to be ready to start the season. I wonder how much of a role they're going to put on him because we saw that he can do it with his legs, man. I mean, there's no question, one of the most athletic guys really burst onto the scene. So I had a lot of people on my show when the transfer happened and they announced Mellott was going to take the starting job. Not a lot of people knew who he was, and they kind of really and truly wrote Montana State off in the playoffs. They were like, I don't see this team really making it very far. And he came out and put on a show against, I believe it was UT Martin was one of their first games. And I mean, he rushed for like 180 yards and had to put on an amazing performance. So I think if you don't have Mellott at the quarterback spot and you don't have that kind of dual threat, system that they can run, and you have a quarterback who, without question, if let's say Afonso misses 3 games, I wouldn't be surprised if Mellott was the leading rusher for that team.
Yeah.
After those 3 games. And if you have a pocket style quarterback, I think it's a bigger loss, but I don't want to understate how good I do think Afonso is. I think right now he's probably the consensus number one, or maybe with Davis over at South Dakota State, one of the consensus, top running backs in the country. But that was a big thing. And another position that has a lot of question marks, and I know a lot of Eastern Washington fans aren't worried because they've had to replace great quarterbacks in the past, but what are your expectations for Eastern Washington without Eric Berrier at the quarterback spot?
So this feels like a trap, right? Because the obvious answer is, how do you replace a guy like Eric Berrier? But I think Coach Best actually phrased this up when he was talking about the loss of offensive linemen, but it's kind of the same with the quarterback position. How you replace, he's like, just go down the list of all Big Sky, all Americans. And he goes, you don't replace, you reload. And he basically goes, yeah, no one's going to be that exact player. They're not going to get another Eric Berrier, right? Like, even though he and Vernon Adams are very similar, they're very different as well. But exactly, like, how are we ever going to get somebody better than Vernon Adams? I'm not saying Eric Berrier was, but they get somebody that's comparable to him. And even before him, people forget that Gage Gubrud, who he ended up taking the job from when he got hurt, was also setting records, and I believe holds like the single game passing yards or touchdown record, something at Eastern. Like, he was setting records at Eastern, and he gets replaced by Eric Berrier. So it is one of those programs where it is more of a reload than a retool. There was a spring going in the spring. There was like a best quarterbacks in the Big Sky poll going on. And I think the final like 8 were all Eastern Washington guys, maybe 7. And I think skipping his name, but the Montana guy in the Hall of Fame, he was like the other one that made it. Yeah. So you're looking at 7 of the 8 finalists end up making the poll for Eastern Washington. So, I don't want to say they're going to take a step back without Eric Berrier, but the one thing I think to keep in mind here is the fact that this is really the first time we're going to see what an Aaron Best headed coach, can recruit at quarterback. I know he was instrumental as the offensive coordinator and offensive line and as a recruiting person to bring in guys like Eric and Vernon when he was under Bo Baldwin. But this is the first time, he's less involved in recruiting. He's the head honcho, and they're going to have to find their quarterback without him involved in that. So that's what I think will be interesting to see if a Aaron Best-led coaching staff can find a quarterback to replace it, because the Bo Baldwin ones who brought in Berrier and such obviously had no problem retooling. So that will be kind of the story to watch there. If there's a program that do it, it's Eastern Washington, who doesn't want to play in that offensive system. But it will be interesting to see what Eastern Washington looks like without Eric Berrier. I think they'll probably take a smaller step back for them. That's being a top 20 team instead of a top 10 team. I solely expect them to make the playoffs unless they really can't work some things out, which is a big question mark because a lot of the success they've had recently has been with Bo Baldwin guys. But also I think you see some of the younger guys that have come up, and it's not like Aaron Best and their staff has been slacking on the reloading front. So I don't expect a major drop-off from Eastern Washington. But it is a story to watch. I think Gunnar Talkington's kind of the leader in the clubhouse. It's still a Bo Baldwin guy, but it's like, what's the depth behind him? And is it he, who's been a career basically third, second stringer his entire life? Is there just nobody better on this roster to push him, or is he just that good that he can never push past that Eric Berrier, but is significantly better than everybody else on that roster? So a lot to watch at QB1 for the Eagles.
I mean, it's really, I don't think anyone expected him to push Barrier much. I mean, if you had to look at quarterback jobs, him and Cole Kelly had, I mean, it doesn't matter what they went out there and did. They're never going to relinquish that job. I think the quarterback coming in, that whoever ends up winning the job, I do agree that, there's a strong leader in the clubhouse, but you look at Freddie Robertson, Efton Chisholm, even Justice Jackson at the running back spot, all those guys were big contributors for that team last season. And for me, looking at the roster makeup of the team, I know this is not the narrative that's usually behind Eastern Washington. I think this team's defense could be really good next year.
They've made huge strides on defense under Best. Like that is, if you're looking at the difference between Bo Baldwin and Aaron Best, Best has really solidified the defense. Where some, I'm not saying every defensive player they ever got, right? Because Eastern fans can be a little touchy about some things. I'm not saying every defense they've ever had was soft, but they definitely have some of their strongest defenses under Best. In fact, I would say all of their defenses have basically been better than any of Bo Baldwin's sub maybe one or two in that like national title run.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive line for me, Mitchell Johnson, Joshua Jerome are going to be, in my opinion, some of the best defensive linemen in the conference. And then on top of that, the secondary I feel like is being overlooked because they were very young coming into last season, and they went out and got, I believe, I'm blanking on the guy's name. They got I think it's Alfonsi, the 4-star from Washington State, to come in to add some depth at the corner spot. He's like 6'4", runs like a 4.4, 4.5. I mean, the kid can play looking at his film, and they also return, I believe, both starting safeties from last season too. I really do think that Eastern Washington shockingly could have the defense to really help their offense out early as they really try to find some rhythm, because I don't care how good your replacement is, replacing a quarterback like a Barrier, like a Cole Kelly, like even Incarnate Word trying to place a Cameron Ward, to replace a guy who was that good for that long, it's really tough regardless of who you have stepping in. And so I think the expectations are really mixed. I think you even when you did your show looking at all the different rankings, I mean, Eastern Washington, I saw them as high as like 10 and as low as like 25 in some of the polls that were released. So a lot of people don't know where to put them, because I think a lot of people, especially not analysts in the FCS, but fans who might root for their favorite team or just kind of halfway pay attention, Eric Berrier was Eastern Washington to a lot of people. And so I'm really interested to see. And then week 1, they do not have an easy game. I would warn fans, do not let the record fool you. Tennessee State is not Tennessee State from last season. That team is going to come in with Draylon Ellis coming in at quarterback, former OVC Offensive Player of the Year. They got All-American running back and or All-Conference running back and wide receiver. They have 3 All-Conference guys on the D line now that they added Terrell Allen. 4-star linebacker Kavon Pope comes in. I mean, listen, I think we're gonna find out a lot about Eastern Washington week 1, and I think there we'll really figure out if Barrier's loss was as big as a lot of people are looking at it as.
Yeah, and the Eastern Washington, I think part of the reason you see this with the polls, like the uncertainty, is they usually come out kind of slow. Not slow in the sense that they're not good. Slow in the sense that they definitely don't shy away from challenging schedules. They usually play a top flight FCS team if they can find anybody to do it. They did it with Jacksonville State at home and home before Jacksonville State did not return the favor. But they're playing North Dakota State in a couple of years. Like, they go out and try to challenge themselves at an FCS level. Now, you mentioned Tennessee State. When they booked this, probably wasn't the challenge they thought it was going to be, but it's definitely going to be more of so on. I would still probably take Eastern in that game, but it's by no means a cakewalk game. They usually get stuck scheduling like Central Washington or somebody just so they can get a home game, because they do have some athletic or budget woes, which leads to them not being able to necessarily pay an FCS team to go, which is why they rely heavily on those home and homes. And then, they usually play a big-time FBS team, usually Pac-12. I know last year was Mountain West, but and they usually are competitive in those games. They've almost beat UW. They've beaten Washington State. They've beaten or gotten close to beating Oregon State, and they just beat UNLV. So they challenge themselves, but they do lose some of those games. So it's not uncommon for Eastern to come into conference play at 1-2 0-3, and then a lot of people having them at like the 20 rank because they're 0-3. But then you put any other team sub NDSU in that same schedule, they probably have that exact same record. So it's a whole nother side story on why top 25s at the beginning of the year are so difficult. It's because you can't judge like Eastern being 0-3 when they play like Oregon, Tennessee State, and Nevada, and then you have like Montana who's playing like Drake, Butler, and it's like, yeah, of course Montana's set their schedule up to be 3-0. Eastern has set their schedule up to be 0-3 because the power dynamics in the conference of Montana can make money without money games, Eastern can't. So I expect them to probably be towards the 20s by the time conference season starts, but they'll, like every year, they'll climb high. But I think that's part of the reason people really struggle to figure out where to put Eastern, because you could go where I actually think they are in terms of value, where I actually think they'll finish, or how I think my poll is going to look in 4 weeks when somebody's just looking back. So they're a tough team to place, but they're also a good team. I mean, they're like I said, I think they're top 20.
Yeah, I still think they're a playoff team. I think, like you said, unless something catastrophic happens in terms of injuries or that team just doesn't click like anyone thinks they might. I mean, I don't see that team missing the playoffs. I think they have one of the longest streaks, right? I think FCS stats posted today, they have a streak of I forgot however many playoff appearances, and it's like top 5 right now.
Wow, that's weird because they kind of go through this run where they make the title game. Because I think they missed in 19. Maybe I think they do this run where they go to the title game and then they miss. But either way, I mean, they are a constant, like we talked about on the Bluebloods episode you do with me. They're a top 10 program at the FCS level currently. Like you expect them to be there each and every year. And I do think maybe we could see a little bit of what happened with Montana State when we're talking about the Eagles. I think Gunnar Talkington, just being kind of the guy who's been around the program the longest, which is weird to say with COVID because a lot of these guys have been around the program longer than it states on the website. Trey Turner's a guy I know they've been high on for a while at the quarterback position. I could see him possibly taking over midseason if they are having struggles at quarterback and almost having a Tommy Millott effect where I've heard from practice he's a guy that have a lot of hopes in, but he's not necessarily delivering on those expectations in practice. He could be a game guy. Like this is a guy where you might throw him in a game because Talkington gets hurt or something, or just isn't performing, and he could show out and show that he's a live action kind of guy. So I'd say another thing to keep in mind here is like I think Trey Turner could be that guy that at the end of the season maybe gets the Eagles into a higher gear to where they can make a deeper run in the playoffs than maybe it looks like they would have made about halfway through the season.
And I found the stat. It was winning season. So Eastern Washington has the longest streak of winning seasons in the FCS at 15. Of course, North Dakota State, Sam Houston second with 12, and North Dakota State really ain't been here that long. San Diego, South Dakota State, and Montana are the next on the list. So that's what I was thinking of. They have a long history, the longest streak in the FCS right now.
It goes to show how good all those programs are when you're considered a bad season when you're 6-5, right? I know that was a big talking point for James Madison for a long time, was like, yeah, they're bad years or 6-5. And that's, I guess, the show of a successful program. Montana fires their coaches if they only win 7 games. Then you have programs that would pay a lot of money for a coach that would win them 7 games. So it's different to see the power dynamics of the FCS, even in one of the larger conferences like the Big Sky. Some schools, Northern Arizona, Idaho, been okay with 4 or 5 wins. Montana fires coaches with 7. So it's crazy.
It's a different world in some of these programs, man. But looking at, I'll pull up the preseason polls as well for everybody. Looking at these predictions right now, man, who are your sleeper teams in the Big Sky that might not be a top 5 team right now, but you could see sneaking up into that top 5, top 3 range by the end of the season?
Yeah, so we got a lot of new coaches, so I'm not going to rule out some of the new guys. Like obviously, I'd love to see Idaho do it. We'll talk about Idaho more. Idaho State has a lot more work I think they have to do, so I'm not sure they can surprise. But you look like I think it was like 6 of the last 7 conference titles have been at least shared by a team that was outside of the top 5 in the Big Sky. So if you're looking at that I'm going to include Eastern in this. So you're looking through that 7 through 12 mark. I actually really like Cal Poly. And anybody that's been following, my takes on the internet for a while, I was one of the few people when they made that hire that first season who was like, yo, they're not going to be that good. Like, he is trying to take a triple option team and turn it into basically his spread system. I'm like, there's no way they're going to be that good. And I was like, one of the few people saying, like, Cal Poly is not going to be an instant turnaround. It's going to take some time. That said, I'm a big believer in the third year of a coach. I think the third year is where you kind of see what it is. And Bo Baldwin will be entering his third season. I think this is where we're going to see them really take that next step. I don't think they'll win the conference title, but as you mentioned, maybe finish in that top three, like a Sac State has kind of become, or a UC Davis, who were perennial bottom dwellers until they made the hires of Dan Hawkins and Troy Taylor, and then all of a sudden skyrocket up within 1 or 2 seasons. I think you look at Bo Baldwin, he's 2-12 in his first 2 seasons at the helm, but he's still 97-47 overall, being the head coach of 3 separate programs. In his third season with Eastern Washington, coming off, yes, some winning seasons of 6-5 and 8-4, but as we covered for Eastern Washington, are kind of meh. I mean, that was during the buildup, so like people are probably still happy with it. Third season, he goes 13-2 and wins the national title in 2010. So if I'm going to put my faith in one team outside the top 6, I'm going to go with Cal Poly. I think Bo Baldwin has got his guys in. They've been huge on trying to get a quarterback through the transfer portal and the recruiting ranks through the high schools. And I think this is that season where it's his third season. This is where you're going to see the most improvement from the Cal Poly Mustangs. And if I was going to say my sleeper team, I'm going to go with Cal Poly in the Big Sky. I think Northern Colorado is kind of a hot mess right now. I know, like, you're looking at the same kind of thing there with Ed McCaffrey, third season. But they've had so much out, where Cal Poly's been the opposite. They've had so much come in. Now, maybe all that out was good, and Northern Colorado surprises some people. But Cal Poly's won. And then if you just want like a second kind of sneaky pick, if you ask Bobby Hauck, half of the Montana media, because they have a love crush on Bruce Barnum, they do have high recruiting classes because they do get recruit the Vancouver, Portland area. And yes, they usually have one of the top classes in the FCS. Barnum has been there for multiple seasons, and this team has only been good 1 year. So I don't have the faith in them, but I'm sure if you talk to some Montana media or Bobby Hauck, they would tell you Portland State's a team to watch out for this year. And Bobby Hauck's usually always saying they're a top contender in the Big Sky. They never are, but maybe this year they are. So I'll give you Portland State, Cal Poly. That's kind of my 2 sleeper teams to at least keep your eye on outside the top 6. It could finish, in the top 4.
I don't mind. Like, I would say my 2. You probably had my second one. I think we kind of agree that Portland State is probably that default second pick. I feel like they got some good talent on the team in certain spots. The problem is consistency, and do they have the overall depth to really go toe to toe with some of those top teams? I think if you're talking about them breaking into the top 3, something like that, they're going to have to pull off some really big upsets this year and really show some major improvement. I think, especially at the quarterback spot, you've got to have that guy at quarterback to, I think, in my opinion, go win the Big Sky. And Bo Kelly at wide receiver is somebody I really like for Portland State. And on the defense, man, Anthony Adams, I don't think I know he gets his respect on the all the American teams, all conference teams, but I don't think the average fan really realizes how good Anthony Adams is in the secondary.
Yeah.
Everywhere, man.
You have to convince some Big Sky people when you're filling out like your all conference team, because it's just Portland State is one of those programs that just kind of gets looked over. But I agree with you. Portland State they're loaded with talent. I went to the game. Camas, or Union High School, has become this huge powerhouse in Washington State football. But they're out of Camas, Washington, which is, for those of you not familiar with Northwest geography, it's just across the Columbia River from Portland. So it's basically Portland North, but different state. They won the state title like 3 years in a row. I got to watch it twice. And you got guys from that high school, like at wide receiver, Darian Chase. Jojo Ciafelli is a running back. I think is going to take a huge step forward this year. And then they had, I think his name was Victor something. Ended up being he was a 4-star prospect until like the very end. And I think he dropped down to a 3-star. Committed to Nebraska as an athlete. I think they tried him out a little at quarterback, a little bit at running back, and a little bit at wide receiver. He's transferred back to Portland State last season, but this is going to be his first season really under the system. I expect him to take a huge leap forward. So you're not wrong in the fact that they get a lot of guys from like Portland Jesuit. You get a lot of people from Camas and Union, which are two powerhouse programs in Washington now that are beating the Seattle programs like Rainier Beach and Lake Stevens and Bellevue, which is where Isaiah Fonse is from. So like they're playing 4A football, which is top flight in Washington, and winning. And these kids are going to Portland State. Problem is I just haven't seen them capitalize on any of it, which is why I go like pump the brakes a little bit on Portland State every year. But you're right. They might have the most talented roster in the entire Big Sky. So I don't know if it's coaching or just buy-in or the fact that their home games are away games because they have to drive to Hillsboro.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's a program with a ton of promise and a ton of talent that just outside of one miraculous season has never really seemed to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I know in the JUCO route too, they have some JUCO guys that have really turned out. I know VJ Mallow on the defensive line was out of the JUCO circuit in California, and he was one of the top newcomers last year. Had a bunch of sacks, a bunch of tackles for loss. But if I had to pick one, I guess it's kind of. I mean, there's 7, but I think Northern Arizona is a team that, if they can get it rolling, could be a scary team to see midway through the season. I know they got the FBS win last year in impressive fashion. And I really do think RJ Martinez is a little bit overlooked as a quarterback. And I think he has the athleticism to really be special if he can put it together. Also, like Kevin Daniels at the running back spot for them. The question for me is do they have the talent on the defensive side of the ball? Because when you look at some of those top teams in Montana State with a lot of guys returning. Sacramento State brought in a lot of guys as well on the defense side of the football. Do they have the defense to really go up against the top teams in the conference? And that's kind of my reservation for them. But I wouldn't be surprised if Northern Arizona ended up finishing above Eastern Washington if things don't work out. UC Davis potentially. Weber, I think, is another team that I think you talked on your top 25 show. A lot of people are wondering where to put them. I mean, if Northern Arizona went out there and finished 4th, I don't know if I'd be the most shocked person in the world.
Yeah, the thing that I think gets forgotten about Weber was that they were being considered going into the 2020 season a possible national title contender. They still have that quarterback. Yes, he's also dealt with his own share of injuries in Bronson Barron. But the thing that I think gets passed over is they went out and challenged themselves last year. And yes, they did fail at it. They did end the season in the top 25, but they played James Madison. They played Utah. They were not afraid to be like, yo, this is our chance at being a national title contender. Let's iron sharpen iron as much as possible. They didn't get enough of those games. They showed that maybe they aren't a national title contender. That said, we said this year there's probably only 2 out of the Big Sky. I still think they could easily finish 3rd in this conference. I think Weber State's a team a lot of people are sleeping on because they did have a bad year last year, but they forget that they also were a winning record, a top 25 type program with backup quarterback the entire season. So I think Weber is a team that's being slept on, but I'm not going to include them in my sleeper teams just because, they were picked 4th. They're still the coaches and media in the Big Sky still respect them. Maybe not enough so to put them back up where at one point they'd won 4 straight conference titles or 3, 4.
It was 4 because they won 2017 through 2020, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I think, you are correct. So it's like they won 4 in a row. So you're not dumb to put them at like 1st or 2nd because history would tell you 4 of the last 5 years, they've gotten a share of the title. So I wouldn't be sleeping on Weber. And NAU, you're right. I think NAU has some of the best wide receiver talent in the Big Sky. I mean, Eastern obviously has maybe more dudes in terms of top flight dudes. I love what NAU brings back. It's just going to come down, like you said, can RJ Martinez get him the ball?
Yeah, that's a big thing. He's Tommy Mellott, I think, without as much proven arm talent. Because Mellott did go out there and show, I believe it was the Sam Houston game where he put on a show through the air against a really good defensive team in Sam Houston State. I don't think you've seen that from RJ Martinez yet. And for Weber, I do agree with you because I think they also returned Dante McMillan at the running back spot, who was their leading rusher, and Todd McPherson, I believe, comes back at the wide receiver spot for them. And Eddie Heckard is a stud at the defensive back spot for them. So I do agree because I had Weber, I think, 24th in my poll that I submitted. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if they jump into the top 20 either. I think the Big Sky is deeper than I think some people outside of the area really consider. Because I've talked to some fans of other conferences, and they really just kind of look at the Montana states, and I don't
Yeah.
think they understand how good some of these other teams are.
Oh, and I've always put it this way. I mean, yes, the Missouri Valley is kind of the measuring stick at the moment because the CAA is taking a drop off. The SoCon's trying to figure out what they're doing. The Southland's going to pick it apart. But, like, I'll take, for instance, our sixth place team, Northern Arizona, against the Missouri Valley sixth place team, right? Missouri Valley, I think if you look at it, North Dakota, South Dakota State, yeah. Southern Illinois recently. Once again, a lot of that's coaching. Missouri State, a lot of that's coaching. They've been terrible before Bobby Petrino got there. And if history is any teller, those who don't learn it are doomed to repeat it. Probably his last year there. He's probably going to bounce. Name me one team when Bobby Petrino left the next season they were even remotely close to what they were. He leaves. He gives you the ultimate glory while burning down everything after he leaves. So Missouri State can enjoy it while it's there. But I'll take Northern Arizona, Idaho, Portland State over Western Illinois, Youngstown, North Dakota, South Dakota. So I know it's those teams get picked up. It's kind of like the SEC because Alabama is in that conference, right? Yeah, they play NDSU every year. You beat them, you're almost guaranteed to be a top 25 team, depending on how whatever other games you lose because you beat NDSU and you lose to NDSU and you only move down one or two spots because it's NDSU. Nobody expected you to win. So I think the Missouri Valley gets a little bit of that. I don't want to say bias, right? But it's just the way that perception works. Where I would say I'll take Eastern Washington versus, the Missouri Valley's 5. So, which is probably Northern Iowa. So yeah, every day of the week, I'll take the Eagles over Northern Iowa this season. So I agree. I think it's deep. I think it's as deep as the Missouri Valley. The only difference is their top 2 are better than our top 2. And I think that's the main difference. But deepness, hell, I'll take Idaho State over Western Illinois, honestly. Like, I'll take our worst team versus their worst team. And I still think they got a fair shake at it. If not, they're going to win it. So
the Leatherneck fans are going to be real upset with you on that one. They're coming for you. But
next time I'm in Macomb, Illinois, I'll make sure to tweet at them where I'm at so they can come tell me in person.
Exactly. Told them to meet you in Frisco. Come watch, one of the Dakota schools play a Big Sky school. But man, predictions here. But first, before we get into your official, I'm just going to let you give me your top 3. The first question I have about these predictions is I was reached out to by a beat writer for Sac State. And his question to me was, why do I think Sac State is being overlooked going into this season? Now, there are second in these polls, which are the conference polls, but they're really kind of, I've seen them as high as I believe 6. That's where I had them in my poll. And I've seen them outside the top 10 in some other polls. So for you, why do you think Sacramento State, who is coming back? They got 9 starters on the offensive side of the ball coming back. A lot of that defense coming back. Why aren't they being looked at as a realistic contender for the national title and or the Big Sky title again?
Well, national title is easy. They've won the Big Sky now twice and got knocked out of the playoffs extremely early. Like you can't be viewed as a national title contender until you contend nationally, and they have not done that. That's why I would say in terms of national perception, that's why Sac State doesn't get the love. It is a little bit of when you think Big Sky, you think Montana State, Eastern. Recently, Weber has kind of creeped into that, but I think it's the same thing that plagues their rival across the causeway, UC Davis. Been a constantly good program. I think they finished the season ranked 10th last year. Most people have them ranked 25, and they don't lose that much. They actually have the returning, Alonzo Gilliam, who won like the best player in the Big Sky Award for preseason. So I think it's a similar perception that they're the 2 California schools in the Big Sky, and they don't get the love. A lot of the Big Sky media is out of Montana, so those schools get the love. As far as in conference, I mean, yeah, you know it. They have a lot of returners back, including 2 quarterback system. Like, it's going to be hard to convince anybody that the 2 quarterback system is going to work. I think anybody with eyes can tell you Jake Dunaway is the answer, and that's who they should be going with. But until they do that, they'll probably still get a share of the title because they do. They're actually the first outright title winner in a long time recently, and they're that team that I think people sleep on every year because they're just. I was going to make the joke when you said it. There's a Sac State beat reporter. Like, we've tried as part of the Big Sky Podcast Network to bring in Sac State forever, and it's one of those schools that just we found one guy who was like interested. So I just don't think you hear about them enough. And unless you hear about something, it doesn't come to perspective. I think that's why you see like the coaches have them ranked higher than the media does, because the coaches obviously are like, oh, I have to play Sac State. They're really good. Where the media is like, oh, Montana State. Obviously, I think anybody would have bet a condo that those two would be 1 and 2 in the media poll. When those two teams are even remotely decent, they both get ranked way higher than they deserve. Not this year, obviously, but usually because, they are like Texas and Texas A&M, right? Like Montana is Texas. They're back, and every year they're back, and they get first place votes, and then they don't win the conference. It is funny when you think about it, Sac State's won the conference twice. The last Montana school to win the conference, I think, was Montana State in like 2013. So it's almost been a decade since either of the Montana schools have won a conference title. Yet Sac State, Portland State, Southern Utah, have won the titles in these times. So Weber. So it is crazy when you think about how upside down the Big Sky has been in the last decade, which is what I think is some media members just haven't made that switch that teams like Davis, teams like Sac State, teams even like Weber are good. And it's not just Montana's conference anymore.
I agree. And that's, perception drives everything. I think that's why you see a lot of, especially with media polls, like you were saying, like if the media is not hearing about you, because there's voters, looking at the FCS stats, there's voters from Florida all the way up to Washington. And how many people in the South are really watching Sac State football and know what that team's bringing back? There's probably fans who are going to watch this episode. We have a large portion of like Southern fans on our show that probably didn't know Sac State ran a 2-quarterback system. And so, it's bad, but looking at last year, how much would have that helped Sac State to beat South Dakota State last year? They lost by, I think, 5?
Yeah, it was close.
In that game.
Yeah. It was a muggy, weird.
Yeah, it was a weird game. I don't know. It's one of those games like you always hear about the legendary games that keep you on the edge of your seat. That game to me just seemed to drag on, man. That game I didn't even feel comfortable watching it.
But if you looked at the box score, you're like, wow, what a game. But watching that, it felt like you were watching almost like game tape. Like,
yeah,
everything was slowed down so like so it could circle out like, oh, this is where this block was missed, and you need to hit. Like, if anyone that's played the sport and watched film, that's what it felt like. Was you were watching this in a slowed down chunk segment, and the game felt like it was 5 hours of film study instead of a 2.5-hour game. So yeah, that was weird. It would have done a lot because South Dakota State has become a national brand. They are little brother to the Bison, and they suffer with their own inner demons with that. But in terms of national perspective, it would have been huge for Sac State to get a playoff win against a team that was just in the national title, a team that's number 2 in the preseason this year. Can you imagine? We talk about the difference. South Dakota State probably still would have been picked number 2 because Mark Gronowski is coming back. So now Sac State could be talking about, we actually beat the number 2 team in the preseason poll in the playoffs last year. Where's our respect? The issue is they lost to them, and now they're sitting here going, where's our respect? They're still getting top 10, top 15 votes, and they're upset about it. And that's where I'm going like, hey, maybe the britches are getting a little high in Sacramento. And then you go enjoy a couple more tacos and margarita at Cantina Alley and just relax for a bit and let the season play out. Because right now they're acting like they're a Montana and they have history and prestige to fall back on. And realistically, they are an upstart Big Sky program that has done nothing to deserve the respect except the last 2 years. And in the playoffs, as far as national perception is, they haven't done anything. So they have some business to take care of this year. A semifinal appearance would do a lot for that program. And just low-key plug to them, they have some of the best digital media people, at least last season. I hope they're back in the entire FCS. So if Sac State is watching this, you do it better than most schools in the FCS digital-wise. If you keep it up, people will start seeing what you're doing. The school's trying, which is good to see.
Yeah. Hey, go win another Big Sky title and at least get to the semifinals, and everything will take care of itself.
Yeah,
after
it's
that.
Weird how that happens, right? If you just win, things take care of themselves.
Or do it like Montana State, just get to the title. If you lose to North Dakota State or someone like that, no one's going to fault you. Just get to the dance, and I think everything will be all right. But man, so your predictions, man, give me your winner and just give me your runner-ups in the 2 and 3 spot.
Yeah, so I have This is going to be unpopular, but I have flip flop between this a bunch. If we did this tomorrow, this answer could be different. Right now, I'm going with Bobcats. I know that's unpopular. They lose Troy Anderson and Ty Okada, but I think this team is still a Jeff Choate defensive team in the sense that they're going to be able to reload some of those defensive pieces with sophomores, redshirt freshmen, et cetera, that Jeff Choate had brought into the program. I'm not saying they're going to have Troy Anderson, but it's kind of like Eastern. You can't reload a Troy Anderson. However, I think what we said, we are talking about Tommy Millott as one of the best quarterbacks in this conference. He played 4 games last year. Technically, like, 3.5, 4.1, whatever it is, when he got hurt. So it's like, I think that coming back, Isaiah Fonse coming back, the refortifying of the running back room will help the Bobcats. And you bring in Vegan, whose sole responsibility was this is a national title team that can't play offense. Whether it was Bauman or Tucker Rovig, they just weren't efficient offensively. And that seems fixed under Vegan. And that's where I give them the slight nod is I think nobody's talking about Cam Humphreys or anybody at Montana. Until they prove their quarterback situation is figured out and they have a guy, I'm going to take Tommy Millott, who did everything in his power to be an all-conference quarterback this preseason, only playing 4 games, while there are some returners around the league. It's not like everybody was wiped out. He beat out guys to be the all-conference guy. So I think when you have a good returning quarterback, a good returning running back, and some pieces at the offensive line with a guy whose job is offense and offensive line, and then you look at that they still have choke pieces on that defense. So it's not that Vegan has to spend a ton retooling on Troy Anderson or Ty Okada. I just like the Bobcats' chances a little bit more than the Grizzlies, which means that the Grizzlies are my 2. Like I said, easily could move up this spot. The Cat Grizz game is in Bozeman this year. I think if you look at their schedules too, Montana State has a lot easier of a conference schedule than Montana, which is why I also can justify this a bit. Montana has to play a lot of tough games this season where the Bobcats don't necessarily have to. Their toughest game is week 1 of conference season at Eastern Washington, and then obviously at home against Montana to close the season. So after that, they get Davis at home, they get Weber at home, they're at Northern Colorado, they play the Bengals on the road or at home, but it's like they don't have anybody that should challenge them except Montana and Eastern really at the beginning of the year. Yes, Weber, but in Bozeman. So that's where I just go. Their schedule seems a lot more manageable. Where you look at the Montana schedule and they have Portland State at home, but Portland State has beaten them at home before, which is wild. So has Sac. And then they're at Sac, which we're talking about as a good team who has gotten the better of them the last couple seasons. They're at Weber, not exactly a tough place or a place you want to have to go play, especially October Halloween weekend. It's going to be cold in Ogden. And then you host Eastern the week before you go to Bozeman. So I just look at that, and then they play Cal Poly in between Weber and Eastern, which I'm just like, as my sleeper team, they very well could end the year with at Sac State, at Weber, Cal Poly, Eastern, and Montana State, which all could be top 6 teams at the end of the season for the Big Sky, which is why I just think Montana might be the better team. But if we're doing preseason polls or end of season predictions, I think Montana State wins the title. Montana can probably make a deeper run in the playoffs, but end of the season, who's taking home the championship trophy? I think it's going to be the Bobcats. And then we'll have a flop of last year where the Grizz beat the Bobcats, but the Bobcats go further in the playoffs. Yeah. I can see the Bobcats beating the Grizz, but the Grizz going further in the playoffs this year. And then I think UC Davis, I'm just high on them. They don't lose a lot of pieces. They have Alonzo Gilliam coming back. They also have quarterback figured out. They've got a new indoor facility. They've had great recruiting. I just am really high on UC Davis to have a better year than they had last year. So that's my 3.
I don't mind it. And I mean, just to make you feel better, I believe Ty Okada decided to come back.
Well, then there we go.
Yeah, because he's on the 2022 roster on the website. I was about to say, I was talking to him before fall camp, and I was like, I'm pretty sure because he used that extra year of eligibility.
Well, then, dude, I feel even
better
in this decision. So they're really missing Troy Anderson and a couple pieces on defensive line.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's it.
Easy replaceable. Either way, they lose nothing. Well, wide receiver, but wide receivers at
Yeah,
a place like Montana State are more of a dime a dozen. It's the opposite of Eastern. They're the same, but Easterns are really good. Montana's are like, or Montana States are just kind of like, there's a guy who will get open and he'll have really good numbers.
because Willie Patterson, I think, was the second leading receiver last season behind McCutcheon. So I think Patterson should be good. And I believe
Yeah.
no, okay, no, it was flopped. I'm gonna say the lost a receiver to Tarleton State. I thought it was from Tarleton to Montana State, but it was flipped. I mean, for me, I think I agree with you to a point on the schedule, but for me, I got Montana right now by like a hair. But I agree with you, man. It's so back and forth. Like one day, I'm like, ah, man, Tommy Malotte's there. They got this, they got that. But then Montana, I'm looking, I'm like, and they arguably have one of the best linebackers in the country in O'Connell. I think they have the best cornerback in the country in Justin Ford. And for me, Marcus Knight coming back is something that I think a lot of people are overlooking too. I mean, that guy set the world on fire just a few seasons ago. And if he can
It's
come
true.
in and if he can offer me 80% of what he gave me 2 years ago, that offense is going to go to another level. And at the quarterback spot, I don't think it's I will be I will eat my words if this doesn't happen. If Lucas Johnson doesn't take the first snap this season, I don't know what to say. I mean, to me, he is such a clear-cut favorite in that competition, especially when you look at what he did last season, going 8-1 as a starter at San Diego State. Had, I believe, his completion percentage was above 60%, had over 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, was one of, I mean, he was one of the top quarterbacks in the Mountain West last season and was one of, in my opinion, one of the most efficient quarterbacks there. So I really do, I have faith that if Lucas Johnson can take those first snaps, that you're going to see for the first time in a long time, Montana have a really, really talented quarterback because I think he could do a lot. He's also he's not a run first quarterback like a Malott or an RJ Martinez, but he can still get out of the pocket and make some plays with his feet too. So I'm putting a
Yeah.
lot of stock in Lucas Johnson and Marcus Knight. But man, I think it's so close between Montana and Montana State that
Oh,
really and
definitely.
truly and with the Big Sky, I think you talked about it as well. The two or three best teams in the conference really haven't won the conference title the past
Yeah.
two. I mean, when you're looking at it
No.
overall, like you said, those deep playoff runs would say otherwise. And I think a third team, I'll lean Sac State just because they've returned so much talent from a team who just won the conference last year. Like you said, it's a lot different winning a conference title and competing for that and going to win a national title and compete in the FCS playoffs. You have to
Especially in the
be,
Big Sky, right? Because like
yeah,
it's not round robin. Yeah. Everybody
exactly.
doesn't
That's
play
the big thing.
everybody, so it's
I
like
know there's
yeah,
a lot of people who hate that. I noticed that, I'm
one of
kind of
them.
newer to FCS football on Twitter at least, and man, there's some people who are very vocal about the Big Sky not playing everybody.
Well, because it's like, all right, you come from like the FBS background, right? And it's
Hmm.
like I did with Idaho being a Sun Belt and WAC and everything, and in those conferences, there's a conference title game. So it's like it
Yep.
doesn't matter that you're split east, west, north, south, leaders, legends, whatever the Big Ten did back in the day. Um,
Yeah.
you had if Ohio State, Michigan, or Ohio State and Wisconsin were the top of that division, and the Sun Belt, if it's App and
Coastal or
Louisiana,
someone.
then
Yeah.
yeah, it's like they meet up against each other. It's like if we split north, south, east, west, whatever, and we had Eastern won the West and Montana won the East, they meet in a title game. And we're like, okay, at least we have a conference champion because we had two teams that played their entire division, maybe a sprinkle from the other side, and then they played one another. But here it's like, yeah, Sac State can play the bottom six teams and one team in the four, or like top four, and then Montana could get everybody in the top six, and then it's like, well, Montana's the better team. They have the tougher schedule, and you're always going to have tougher schedules because homes and aways. But
Yeah.
you add the extra element of who you get to play on top of home and aways. Like I said, I think Montana State's schedule is just significantly easier than Montana's, and they have a large overlap of common opponents. It's just home and away. But then you look at teams like Sac State and Eastern, it's a little different this year, which is what
And
sucks about predicting the champion, because the champion is rarely the best team in the Big Sky.
it's tough. And, that kind of leads me before we get to Idaho to end the show, because I know I'll say that for last. That way we didn't have to worry about not getting anything in. Um, the CAA, there's been a lot of rumors. They're up to 15 teams and they're potentially going to add a 16th next season, whether that be Howard, Norfolk, or whoever they end up pulling out of somewhere. It could be a Big South team again. and they're talking about kind of petitioning to move their schedule around and having a conference championship game with divisions. If that happens, do you foresee the Big Sky trying to follow the same model and moving that season up a week and trying to have that conference championship game?
So it depends. The major hurdle here is we're assuming the NCAA then
Allows
allows the
that. Yeah,
conference.
that's a big what
Yeah,
if.
because that's the big issue right now. Is that's part of the reason why like a SWAC team has issues getting into the FCS playoffs. Is like,
Yeah,
the winner goes to the Celebration Bowl, but if you play in a championship game, you're uneligible for the playoff. So the second place team in the SWAC championship can't come play in the playoffs, even though they missed out on the opportunity to play in the Celebration Bowl. So we need some NCAA accordance, which if the CAA does it and goes to 16 and creates the first super conference of the FCS, even though I would say the teams are a little bit less super than the size, then yeah, I would say the Big Sky and the Missouri Valley are also large. And I could see both of them kind of look. If you got the CAA, the Big Sky, and the Missouri Valley on the same page of, hey, look, we want to move towards conference title games to be able to determine a true champion, then yes, I think the Big Sky would look at it. Then the question is should, because then like, do you really want like if it's I don't know, north south, because that's the other thing. If you look at a Big Sky map, the north south would not be fair. You'd have Eastern, Idaho, Montana State, probably Idaho State versus Portland's. Like Weber State would win the South every single year unless NAU or like you said Cal Poly, I guess Davis. But like it's significantly it'd be like the SEC West where it'd be really tough in one division. So then you're saying like, okay, well, what if Montana has a great year, but they lose to a really good SAC team in the conference title game? We just saw it last year with Montana State loses a auto bid by losing to Montana the last game of the season, call that a conference title game, and then they end up going to the conference or the national championship. So there is that little bit of like, do you really want, if it's not necessary, your two best teams in your conference to face one another and potentially a week before playoff selection hurt one of their stocks? So preferably, I'd like to see us shrink to 9, have a 10th like affiliate member, Seattle U. I see you in the WAC as a basketball affiliate. Then you have 10 for basketball. So you have traveling partners. I think that'd be perfect. And then you have 9 football, which in the FCS schedule of 11 games means you have 8 conference games, 3 out of conference games. I think that would be the perfect solution. And I think the Big Sky has the depth to where if we were to allow the WAC to take a couple teams or whatever, like you could pick any 3 teams to remove from the Big Sky and it would still be a strong conference. It's like, yeah, Montana State are like our Texas, Oklahoma. We would hurt if we lost them, but you do have brands like Eastern. You do have historic brands like Idaho. You do have upstart brands like Sac State, Weber, UC Davis on the climb. Idaho State has a national title. So it's like you do have teams, NAU, like that has been around forever. So you do have brand names. You'd still be a fine conference. So I would prefer we shrink to 9, add a 10th basketball affiliate. Then add a conference game. But hey, I also don't want to get left behind. If that's the way the sport's moving, then the Big Sky should absolutely do that.
Yeah, because I mean that was a big thing once the WAC kind of is on life support right now after some decisions.
Isn't that funny how that changed? They went from like we're going FBS in 5 seasons to like we might need to merge with the ASUN.
Yeah, I mean, it really and truly, I mean, it's to the point now where it would almost be smarter just for those WAC teams to be like, hey, Southland, like, can we please come back home? Because I don't see, because for me, I think when you look at geographically, the WAC, Montana State, man, that travel would be ridiculous, really and truly. Like, if you added teams like that. So you're looking at Northern Arizona, I think fits pretty well into what where the WAC could potentially go. So you could probably grab them. Could you convince Idaho and Idaho State potentially, because they're probably going to come together, I would imagine. Just looking at it, maybe not.
Yeah,
but I don't
depends what
the
state makes us do for sure. But
yeah, and I don't see. I mean, I guess take your pick of the California schools if you wanted. One of them, probably maybe UC Davis would probably be your best option there.
Yeah,
potentially.
Because if the WAC does have their intentions right of there's three conferences. I'm sure you know this, but for the people that might be listening that don't, the WAC is one of the three conferences that can just declare their FBS because they already had an FBS charter. That's the appeal of the Western Athletic Conferences. They were an FBS member, so that's when they're like, oh, we have aspirations of going FBS. And you're like, with this membership, well, maybe not, but they needed football to be able to make that jump. So obviously the long play plan, everybody that understands conference realignment was thinking was they're going to add a couple more big schools. Now, I would love if Idaho made a jump to the FBS personally, under the right situation. We did it once under the wrong situation, ending up in the Sun Belt twice, actually founding member of the Sun Belt Football Conference, which makes zero sense and made even less sense when we came back.
Yeah.
But I fear if you talk to Montana State fans, they are entertaining the fact of FBS for a long time. One of the Big Sky Podcast Network, the R&R Catcast guys, they were talking about it, like, actually, what are our feelings? Because I remember when we started this, they were anti-FBS. They have changed their tune a little bit to where they're at least open to entertaining the idea. I don't know if they're still thrilled about it, but they're open to entertaining it. And they say a lot of Cat fans are starting to feel that way. So I could see if Montana, I've said this to Kyler, like if we did a big reshuffling of the deck with the G5, P5, FCS, like what's going to happen? If Idaho is left behind from wherever the two Montana schools go, I would, it would be a peculiar spot to be the Idaho athletic director, because at that point, I mean, we've gone from the point where we were in the original Pac-10 to now playing what would be effectively D2 ball if, it doesn't happen. So I think for Idaho to even entertain the WAC under the assumption that the WAC is trying to go FBS, which I do think the western half of the U.S. needs a second FBS conference other than the Mountain West. If Montana State were going, I think Idaho would 100% and 99% go. I'm not sure the WAC is interested, is part of the problem. But I do think, like, if you look at the WAC, I know it was Big Sky, but if you look like Sam Houston State, Stephen F. Austin, I know Sam Houston's moving, but they would probably come back, depending, to be more regionally than the Conference USA. But you add those schools, you have New Mexico State come back because they're a longtime WAC member. You have New Mexico State, Sam Houston, Stephen F. Austin, Idaho, Montana State. Like, that's not a bad – it's a bad FBS conference, but it's not a bad conference in terms of you have natural rivalries. It's not a patchwork conference where it's like Conference USA right now, where you took a bunch of teams with zero history together
and just threw them all in a pot together.
Yeah. So I would think that's the only way they'd entertain it. I would love if the Big Sky could move up as a whole, but they don't have that charter. Because I think the top half of the Big Sky paired with the top half of the Missouri Valley, I've joked around calling it the Snow Belt. Take the Big Sky's leadership because Tom Wistersill and Dan Satter are doing an awesome job. And honestly, I love the branding of the Big Sky. I mean, it's one of the most socially interactive brands, and not just the FCS college football as a whole. It's usually ranked 6th on SchoolSparks for social media interactions. Like, they do a fantastic job. I think it would be a great FBS conference. Personally, I think they have a lot of good brands. But that was a whole tangent from about to talk about Idaho.
Good. Hey, I love it, man.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hey, what happened if we all joined the WAC?
No, and I mean, you're right, because I was talking. I went to 7 media days this year, just that I could make it to. And one of the ones I was, applied to and got approved, but I just couldn't make it to Spokane, was the Big Sky. And I was looking at it. The fact that they do a 3-day event, they have all these different promotions on social media, like, they do it just amazing in terms of like creating involvement and interaction. Because like you can put a lot of posts up, but if those posts aren't generating clicks and interactions and talk, I think that's where the Big Sky really excels, in my opinion, looking across the FCS. Because like the SoCon has a great history, they got some really good teams, but in terms of social media presence, that conference is atrocious in terms of generating actual interaction on social media. Even though the history and the brands, you would figure that they would be pretty good, but they just haven't evolved with the times. But man, let's get to the final topic here. I know this is a big one for you. Coach Eck coming into Idaho. You guys very active in the transfer portal on the recruiting trail this
Mm-hmm.
year. And I know I told you this when I was on your show. I didn't, I had a North Dakota State fan hit me up when this hire was made and said, listen, Idaho's going to be a playoff team in the next few years. He was like, Eck is legit. He was like, Idaho might have made the most overlooked and impressive hire of the all season. So how do you feel as an Idaho guy about the job he's done thus far and the expectations for Idaho under Coach Eck?
So he's done. Oh, I've told a lot of people because I've gotten this a lot, being kind of a face for the Idaho Vandals. Um, a lot of people have asked me because Paul Petrino had turned a lot of people off. Like, what should we expect this year, right? And what do you think about the coaching hire? And I've said he has said all the right things. I've gotten to meet him three times now, and he says all the right things. He has the right energy. And either way, what I've told people is like, if you want to go to a game, expect an entirely different atmosphere from the coaching staff. They're way more accepting. I mean, I always make the joke. We went from having a coach who wasn't even on social media to a coach whose wife is famous on social media and is a blogger. I think it's I'll plug it. It's Football Babes, I think. Babes of Football, something like that. We go from that. They're like, dropping memes and gifs like, oh, another big recruiting weekend. Their whole thing is time to wake up with a 2 and then wake, the E is a 3. And like they're making hashtags. They're out there, they're hustling, they're shooting, YouTube shorts and stuff, just talking about like, oh, we're driving down the Lewis and Grade on our way to Boise. Any of you prospects wants to stop by. And like they have increased our social media presence a ton, which we talked about. The Big Sky does a good job. It's cool to see that, especially out of, I mean, he's a young coach, but he's not the youngest coach. He's not in his 30s, right? Like,
Right.
to see him embrace it, his staff embrace it. He made a very smart hire in bringing in Thomas Ford, former Simon Fraser head coach, whose brother and him run basically one of the largest academies for like 7-on-7 and everything in the Pacific Northwest, out of Western Washington in the Seattle area. They get like the UW guys train there, half of Washington. Any kid that's from the Puget Sound area has probably trained with them and gone to UW or Wazoo. Like, and so he has that connection still because he still runs it and his brother's still like the CEO or whatever. So we're getting some of these recruits out of Western Washington used to never even bat their eyelashes at us, right? Even when we were FBS, we couldn't convince them to come to Idaho. And now we're getting these kids that are interested. He's also brought in the in-state recruiting, something that I liked that Paul kept us in national recruiting, like an FBS school. We still, he's from Montana, but Arkansas and everything. He was recruiting heavily. Some of our best players are from Illinois, Florida, Georgia, Missouri. So he had done Arkansas. Like he had basically recruited like he was still at Arkansas and doing SEC recruiting. So it was weird when you got a bunch of running backs from Florida and they're super good. But then they get to Moscow, it snows, they're playing in a dome. It's not SEC country. They're far away from their family. Not all of them stay the whole time. Where I think Eck, he's brought it up like at this level, you don't need to be recruiting FBS or NFL draft caliber guys. You need to build guys or recruit guys who could be. So he's like, don't be afraid to take the 6'6", 200-pound right tackle when he looks like he could add 100 pounds onto his frame, and then you have a 6'6", 300-pound right tackle, right? So he was like, it's more about development, and we've seen that under X so far. So I'm very excited where the program is. I know a lot of players were weighing the option of transferring because it's always stressful when a new coach comes in. And we've only lost a handful of them. And of those, not many were scholarship athletes. Some of them left like natural attrition due to wanting to go play either at a lower FCS or a D2, D3, or just give up football altogether and transfer to an Ivy League school or something to do academics. So that's been really, really cool to see. That said, he likes to run like 22 personnel. Like he likes tight ends. He likes running backs. We are set at running back. Ever since Deion Watson and Buck Buchanan, we really haven't had a ton of tight end production. So he has to retool this roster a bit. It's not built the way that he needs it built to be successful in year one. He was a late hire because we were waiting to announce the hire until he had been removed from the playoffs. So Montana State, thank you for speeding that process up. So he didn't get a full recruiting season. And so You're seeing it a lot. I think we have 15 recruits already signed up for next season's class before the season has even started. So like he has hit the recruiting trail hard since getting there, but didn't have time to get these guys in there eligible pre. We had some transfers in. We talked about it. I actually saw 2 of them. I went to USC Notre Dame last year, and both of them played in that game, and both of them are on Idaho now, which is crazy that we got USC and Notre Dame guys that aren't just whatever, right? They played.
Yeah, that like
and
they're
they played in a
proven, like
huge
they have,
rivalry game.
yeah,
Like
they have
you don't put your
stats.
second, you don't put your second stringers out in that game. So that was cool to see. It's not just an FBS transfer like that's coming down because they're not getting playing time. It's a lot like our lead linebacker Fave who transferred from Wazoo because he just didn't like Mike Leach, is what we heard. But he was a guy who
Not
played.
surprising.
So yeah, he's a cup of tea guy for sure. If you like his cup of tea, then you're fine with him. If not, you're
Yeah,
not.
exactly.
So I have a lot of expectations for Eck this year. I've told a lot of people pump the brakes because, like I mentioned, like this roster is not built for him to win right away. I'm not saying he won't, but I tell people to expect a similar win total to what we were having under Paul, but see a team that fights harder, seems more involved, seems more athletically gifted, seems better trained, and keeps cooler heads. Like, I think this staff is young. They've resignated. They brought in one of our all-time greats and Matt Linehan to come back, and he's brought some energy. So you do get a little bit of that Paul, like the good parts of Paul, hopefully, because he gets a lot of crap, but at the same time, he has one of our highest win totals in the season out of any Vandal coach in the last 20 years. So like there were some good parts of the Petrino era. And hopefully Linehan has both parts from his dad and him being the Erickson and his Eric. So hopefully it's a good team. I expect us to be probably, like I said, I'm big on year 3s. Year 3, I think this could be a team that possibly pushes for a conference title. Year 2, maybe it's a fringe playoff team. This year, I expect playoff spoiler role. I know a lot of people are picking us like 8th or 9th. I have the utmost confidence we could finish 5th or 6th, honestly. I doubt 5th because that would mean that the rest of the sky fell apart because I don't think we're a playoff team this year. But I really do think they could be that 6th team in the conference, and they do have a lot of their games, a favorable schedule, as it were. I mean, it's not great, but like other than traveling to Montana, like you get Eastern at home, which Eastern hasn't beaten us in the Kibby Dome since like 2011. So you're looking at 11 years, which Eastern has been good, and we have not been good in that time. So I have the utmost confidence this team will probably win 4 to 5 games. 5 and 6 is very likely on the table. But I think you're just going to see a team that next year, I expect a lot of people to probably list as their sleeper and possibly move into that top 5 or 6 in the preseason poll next year.
And one of the biggest additions before we wrap up the show was Gibbs at the quarterback spot, former South Dakota State quarterback. Is he the lock for starter, or do you feel like it might be next season when like we really see him kind of take that spot as the guy for Idaho?
So Idaho has had a problem, much like Isaiah Fonse, at the quarterback position and health for a while. We talked about it. 2016, I believe, was the last year we had one quarterback play every single game. Matt Linehan got hurt his senior year. Then we were flip-flopping between Colton Richardson, Mason Petrino. And last 2 years, Beaudry gets hurt. We play some CJ Jordan. We end up having to play freshman Giovanni McCoy. So we have had no stability at the quarterback position. I think if he can stay healthy, that's exactly what Jabari Gibbs is. I mean, he brought him in for a reason. Jabari Gibbs was probably not going to beat out the young, talented Mark Gronowski at South Dakota State, even though he might be as good, if not a better quarterback. But South Dakota State at this point is committed to Gronowski because he gives them more in terms of the future. Gibbs is a redshirt junior, so you still get 2 years out of him. And I don't think it's a coincidence he picked Eck. I'm sure he had a couple different offers, but I think Eck knows what he's about. He was good in the Eck system, and I think he was brought in for a particular reason. And part of that being none of the other quarterbacks really impressed in the spring. The quarterbacks have been a question mark for a while. Ridge Doskal, who's a 3-star top recruit we brought in, or second. I think Bogans beat him out at tight end to show building up the tight end depth, but they're going to be freshmen. He's either our top or second top recruit and was like top 5 in the entire conference in terms of 247 sports. Looks like a freshman. Ty Webb, athletic, needs some refining. Giovanni McCoy, a lot of upside, but needs some refining. The guy who's I think can push him the most is probably going to be CJ Jordan. He was a part of that Union High School and Camas teams we talked about earlier when talking about Portland State. And we only got him because he had a bad injury his senior year, but he had offers to Louisville and everybody. And you talk to people that know the Big Sky, a lot of them think CJ Jordan can be that guy. So it's definitely between Jordan and Gibbs. I think the only issue is Jordan's also had 2 seasons and has only played a handful of games because he also has had the injury bug. So you got 2 quarterbacks right now in a program that has had history over the last 8 years with quarterback injuries, 2 potential starters that have injury history. So I wouldn't be shocked if Giovanni McCoy is the guy who's taking a lot of snaps midseason. But I'll say as a Vandal fan, I feel absolutely confident in Gibbs and Jordan. If either of them get the nod, Gibbs will probably get it because I think he is an guy. But Jordan is still young, so I hope he might ride it out because, I mean, that's a guy I really think has a ton of upside. So we'll see. We have an interesting quarterback battle for sure. But if you were asking feet to the fire, Gibbs is probably starting week 1 versus Wazoo.
I think if it was like you said, there's a lot of external factors. If it was just based off talent, I really do like Gibbs. I think he has all the makings of a guy who you would want. I would say, as you're trying to rebuild a program, because it allows you to have some stability at the quarterback spot, which is one of the hardest positions to find that stability, and allow you to kind of work out the kinks elsewhere on the team as you try to build up the talent, build that culture. So I think landing Gibbs was one of the biggest things. I think for Eck as he took that job at Idaho, man, I'm excited. I know me and you talked on your show that Idaho I think has a really bright future, and there's a lot of fans who are familiar with Eck, familiar with Gibbs, and kind of what's going on in that program that are also, I would say, they're excited right now while you guys might not be a threat to them. But once you guys become a threat, I don't know if they're going to be as excited for you guys.
We get a lot of people, especially in the Big Sky country, that are like, yeah, we just want Idaho to be good because it's good for the Big Sky. And I agree with you. I know our fan base, and we're going to be like Montana shortly where people are just fed up with us because we do already get on the nerves of some people, and we have nothing to get on the nerves about, but we somehow can pull it off. So I know a lot of people want us to be good because a good Idaho is good for the FCS. It's good for the Big Sky. But the whole unofficial saying around Idaho right now is if you know, you know. And that is exactly kind of what you're talking about. The people that know, Jabari Gibbs came here, that Jason Eck came here. He's been the offensive coordinator for South Dakota State. Part of the reason I actually have South Dakota State not ranked number 2. I think that's a little bit maybe me being biased towards Zach. It's a lot to replace. And our offense, like we took most of their offensive staff. So like you want to see what Idaho's going to look like, look at South Dakota State in a couple of years. And like I said, he likes tight ends. He got Chance Bogan, who's one of the biggest recruits that we've ever landed out of Tacoma, Washington, because of guys that he's hired like Tom Ford, who just is plugged into recruiting. And I'm very high. And like they say, if you know, you know.
Hey, it's easy to recruit tight ends when you can point to a guy like Tucker Kraft and be like, look at what we can do and what we can develop. Yeah, I mean the list of tight ends from like South Dakota State is long right now.
I will say I love Jason Eck, but sometimes like, hey, it's marketing, and I went to school for marketing. I love him sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, man, that is kind of a lot. Like he was talking about how if you come to Idaho as a running back, you could be the next Strong. And I'm just like,
Pierre,
well, I mean, maybe.
Yeah. A 4th round pick who might see some carries for the Patriots is a Strong or like Isaiah Davis.
He took like credit for him during the draft. He's like, that's my running back. And like, oh, well, it's South Dakota State's running back. And you were, I mean, your system, sure. Yeah. It's not a lie. Like, he's not lying. I was just like, you sell that point and get us some running backs. I'm not going to complain, but sometimes he says some stuff that makes you chuckle up because he'll claim Goddard, he'll claim Kraft, he'll claim Strong. Like, he'll definitely claim the South Dakota State successes. Hey, but if it helps us win, I'm all here for it.
Hey, if you guys can get an offensive line like South Dakota State has too, I'm sure Idaho fans would be all about that. Because as a former O lineman, anytime I hear how great a running back is, I'm like, show me the offensive line. And there's 3 All-Americans and I think 4 All-Conference guys on that offensive line that pretty good. Mason McCormick is probably going to be a draft pick this year. So,
Yeah. And
uh,
and I'll just say if he does any little bit, I know that's the issue with our offensive line. Not a lot of depth behind it. If we have one injury, we're looking a little rough. But man, like if you want an underrated position group to look at around the country, it's Idaho's running backs. You have I think he was an All-American as a freshman, Nick Romano, as a kick returner, but he's a kid who's absolutely electric. You have Andre Carter, who last year was like 260 pounds. Have you ever seen the photo of him putting the Eastern Washington guy in the disco mode on the turf? That was him. I mean, he's a big guy to bring down. He's slimmed down, actually, but supposed to still have that power. Roshan Johnson was an honorable mention or was mentioned as a Big Sky Conference All-American from Hero Sports last year. They bring in guys like Anthony Woods, Elijah Cummings, who is just a phenomenal freshman. Well, he's going to be a sophomore, true sophomore out of Waco, Texas. Like, this is a running back room that has 4 absolute studs at the position. So it's like, yeah, we don't have an Isaiah Fonse, but like we have like 4 Marcus Knights. So I'm not trying to like. I think our best returning position group is by far our running back room, and I hope by the end of the season they prove me right. And man, if we can get a little bit of offensive help with this X system, I expect a lot out of those running backs. So I'll say for anyone watching this who's not an Idaho person, just keep an eye on the running backs at Idaho. I expect huge stat boosts from them.
And I mean, a running back is just going to be such like as a guy who is picking, some of the awards and like we got our own All-American list. Running back, I'm just terrified. I'm dreading trying to pick like the top 4, 5, 6 running backs to put on All-American teams. I mean, you have so many good ones. Like you mentioned, Idaho has 4 guys who could come out. Marcus Knight at Montana's coming back. If Zay Davis at South Dakota State has a full year healthy, just imagine the stats that he can put up.
A guy like Josh Davis, like
a
guy at Weber who was so good his freshman year and has dealt with his own share of injuries. But like if he gets even remotely back to how he was as a freshman, like we're talking about Josh Davis was offensive player of the year at Weber State like 2 seasons ago and has fallen off. And they've found some depth behind him. Like you're talking, Weber State has depth at running back, but it's Alonzo Gilliam, Elijah Dotson. Like even in the Big Sky, you have guys that are All-American caliber, and some of them are like committee running back by committee guys, which is crazy because you put them on Youngstown State, and they could all be individual starters. Or I'll just keep shitting on Western Illinois. If you put them on Western Illinois, I guarantee our 4 running backs would start at Western Illinois.
I was like, you can't disrespect my guy Jaleel like that, man. Youngstown State, they might not have a lot. They got a running back. Jaleel McLaughlin's my guy, and I mean, I think you even see that with like ETSU, like Sailors won the Offensive Player of the Year this preseason and didn't even start for his team last year because of Quay Holmes. I mean, it's so loaded, and that's not even including a guy like JJ Davis over at Norfolk State who was a true freshman and burst onto the scenes. The kid at Sacred Heart, Malik Grant, as well, just got done. I believe he was one of the top running backs in the country. Isaiah Fonte when he gets healthy, and then we know what
Southern
North Dakota
Illinois
State
is going to have. I forget his name, Williams or whatever.
I think it's Javante, if I'm not mistaken, Javante Williams, I believe.
Yeah,
and
like he's going to be a beast again. This division back at running back. It's crazy we have such high flying offenses when like arguably we're a deep division at running back. That's why I don't complain when none of these guys make All-American lists and like as by committee, but like if they had to be every down backs, they like their odds. Yeah. But why would you get one of them when you've got 4 of them, right?
Exactly. And I mean, even Kevin Daniels at NAU too is a stud. I mean, he was one of the preseason all-conference guys on my list.
And they even have that God, I can't think of his name. They have another good running back at NAU.
Oh man. You caught me off guard on that one. I don't remember what his name is, but I mean, listen, we can go through
all the top. I mean,
there's like I talked to Sam Herder and I was like, man, I don't know how you put together a list of 25 running backs, and he was like, man, I could have made a list of like 40. I mean, there are just that many good ones. I think D-line too this year is another position where, especially edge, where you can have a whole list of guys who are going to go out there and ball out. I mean, Isaiah Land's coming back, Brevin Allen, the list goes on and on there. But man, Chris, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Almost an hour and a half of Big Sky football here, man. So shout out to you. We're definitely going to have you on during the season to preview some games, talk some big storylines throughout the year, man. But once again, plug yourself, plug your show, man. Let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. I'm very active on there at Chris_P_Hammond for those on YouTube. It's right there in front of you. For those of you listening, there you go, spelling. I also run a show called the Football Chris Show, aka the FCS, on FCS Fans Nation. So you can check me out there. Probably will transition a little bit more Big Sky centric. So if you like this as the season goes on, because it is, my team is in there. It is what I tend to pay attention to a little bit more. But that said, I am going to try to keep a national landscape this year, challenge myself doing previews for almost all the FCS conferences. So I should be pretty well versed in every team, all 130 of y'all, before the end of the season. So if anyone's watching that's not a Big Sky guy, I should have you covered. If you ever get tired of hearing Zach talk or you just want more info, make me your number 2.
Hey, nah, man, you got definitely one A and 1A, man. The guys over at FCS Fan Nation, man, listen, they got so many great podcasts. I mean, from Eastern Washington to Montana to national podcasts. I mean, you guys just added the Montana podcast, right? Like just a few days ago.
Yep. Just today's official. So
yeah, so
it's, Fight on Montana, longtime page member. If you need a deep dive into Montana and Montana athletics, that's your guy. But just as this is unaffiliated to the FCS Fans Nation, I will also plug the Big Sky Podcast Network. Fight on Montana does a great job, but we also at that level, which is something I'm a part of. You got Idaho. You've got, I believe they're working on Idaho State. They've got Sac State in the works. They've got Weber. They've got Eastern. They've got, every single, I think we're down to only needing 4 schools for a podcast. So at Big Sky Podcast on Twitter, if you like the Big Sky content, they also hopefully will be doing an around the horn style show called Big Sky Big Takes, like we do every year. I've stepped away a bit from that, but it's another fantastic show. So if you like Big Sky Big Takes at the Big Sky Podcast Network, there's a podcast for literally everything in the Big Sky. So like I say, I joke, we're the SEC of the FCS, and people go, well, you don't win titles. I go, no, but in fan support, we are. Like, we have every school from top to bottom has people that basically care. And that's what it is. 6th in social interactions. People care about this conference, this badge. So I'm a fan of it. So
hey, man,
plug to those guys. But I appreciate all the plugs. I'm done now. I'm done.
Hey, man, absolutely, guys. The FCS Fan Nation channel will be linked in the description below, and their Facebook group, man. If you're all about, he's got the mug there. If you're all about Facebook interaction, you want the most up-to-date content, a community to kind of go back and forth on FCS stuff in the Facebook group. A1, one of the best. I'll say that. I'm not gonna even try to lie. The best FCS community on Facebook for sure. But guys, Chris will be on the show again soon. But for Chris, myself, and the Bluebloods guys, we are out for right now.